You might think the sensation of boiling sugar hitting your skin is the worst pain imaginable. The way it clings, searing down to the nerve endings in a split second. But you would be wrong. The real agony came a moment later. Lying on the kitchen tiles, my arm blistering under 320-degree caramel, I looked up for help. I did not see concern in my sister Bianca's eyes. I saw rage. She stepped over my writhing body, checked her reflection in the oven door, and screamed at me for staining the imported marble floor. "You are just a baker," she spat at me. "You are ruining my perfect night." She had no idea that less than 3 hours later, her billionaire fiancé, the man she had spent years trapping, would be kneeling in front of me, not to propose to her, but to beg me to sign a $15 million partnership contract while she watched in absolute silence. My name is Nia, and if you are seeing this, you probably know what it feels like to be the black sheep of a family that only values gold. Before I tell you exactly how I turned a kitchen disaster into an empire and evicted my own parents from the house I secretly owned, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe that success is the best revenge. Trust me, you are going to want to hear this. I am sitting here in my penthouse overlooking the Atlanta skyline, sipping a vintage Cabernet that costs more than the car my father drives. It is quiet now. The only sound is the electric fireplace crackling softly behind me. But whenever I look down at this faint, jagged scar running along my left forearm, I can still hear the chaos of that night. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of the Brooks family. Bianca was marrying into the Vance dynasty, finally securing the status my mother Patricia had craved for decades. I was just there to help. I was the invisible force fixing the flowers, calming the caterers, and baking the showstopper dessert. I was the background noise. Or so they thought. They forgot that even background noise can become deafening if you turn the volume up high enough. To understand why I didn't just walk out the moment I was burned, you have to understand the grip my family had on me. It wasn't love. It was a debt I was told I owed them for simply existing. While Bianca was the golden child, celebrated for her beauty and her ability to marry up, I was the practical one. The one who dropped out of college to work. The one who handled the bills they forgot. The one they called a failure because I chose an apron over a law degree. They saw a servant. They did not know they were looking at the CEO of the most exclusive ghost kitchen brand in the city. And they certainly did not know that the house they were standing in, the very floor Bianca was so worried about, actually belonged to me. Let me take you back to the moment the heat was turned up, literally and figuratively. The afternoon of the rehearsal dinner felt less like a celebration and more like a hostage situation. The air inside the estate was thick with the scent of imported lilies and the sharp tang of my sister's anxiety. To an outsider, the dining room looked perfect. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier light, and the silk tablecloths were smooth as glass. But to me, it was a battlefield, where the casualties were the staff's dignity and my patience. Bianca was in full meltdown mode, standing in the center of the room like a dictator in a white cocktail dress. She pointed a manicured finger at the table settings and screamed. "I asked for blush pink napkins, not salmon. Are you blind or just stupid?" The young catering assistant trembled, her eyes wide with panic. Before she could stammer an apology, I stepped in. I gently moved the girl aside and picked up one of the offending napkins. It was actually the exact shade Bianca had approved 3 weeks ago, but logic had no place here. "I will fix it," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. I went to the linen closet and pulled out the reserve set, knowing Bianca would find something else to hate within minutes. My mother, Patricia, sat in the corner sipping a mimosa and watching the chaos with detached amusement. She did not lift a finger to help. Instead, she critiqued my posture as I reset 24 place settings at record speed. "Nia, stand up straight. You look like a hunchback," she drawled. "It is embarrassing." I wanted to scream that my back hurt because I had been carrying the weight of this family's incompetence for a decade, but I said nothing. I just kept folding napkins, making sure every corner was crisp, because I knew that if one fork was out of alignment, Bianca would threaten to fire the entire staff. This was my role, the fixer. The invisible hand that smoothed over the cracks so the Brooks family could pretend they were flawless. I checked the floral arrangements, removing a slightly wilted rose before Bianca could see it and launch another tirade. I adjusted the lighting. I dealt with the angry florist who had not been paid yet, promising him I would wire the money from my personal account, just to keep the peace. I was running on caffeine and sheer willpower, convincing myself that if I made this night perfect, maybe they would finally see me. Maybe they would finally say thank you. I was so foolish. I was building a stage for them to shine on, not realizing that in their play, I was cast as the villain, no matter what I did. The tension was building pressure behind my eyes, but I swallowed it down. I had no idea that the real disaster was waiting for me in the kitchen, and that the heat I was feeling now was nothing compared to the fire that was about to burn me. I was standing over the industrial gas range, monitoring the copper pot with the intensity of a bomb disposal expert. Caramel is unforgiving. It requires absolute precision because the difference between liquid gold and burnt trash is a matter of seconds. The thermometer read 300 degrees and climbing. I was just reaching for the whisk when the double doors swung open with enough force to bang against the wall behind me. It was Bianca again. She had abandoned the guests and was storming toward me, holding the bodice of her reception dress against her chest like a shield. "You did this on purpose!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the stainless steel appliances. I froze, my hand hovering over the boiling sugar. I asked her what she was talking about, but she was already in my personal space, her perfume overpowering the scent of vanilla bean. "My dress is tight, Nia. I can barely breathe in it. You have been feeding me heavy carbs all week so I would look fat next to you today." The accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. I had spent the week making her salads and green juice, while I survived on coffee crusts. But in Bianca world, I was always the saboteur. I turned back to the stove, trying to lower the flame. "Get out of the kitchen, Bianca," I said, keeping my voice low. "This is not the place for a tantrum. It is dangerous in here." That was the wrong thing to say. Being dismissed was the one thing my sister could not tolerate. She grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. "Do not turn your back on me when I am speaking to you." She was hysterical now, her face twisted in an ugly sneer that ruined her perfect makeup. I tried to pull away, but she shoved me. It was not a playful push. It was a hard, malicious shove intended to hurt. My hip slammed into the edge of the stove. I lost my balance and my left arm flailed out instinctively, trying to catch the counter. Instead, my forearm connected with the handle of the copper pot. Time seemed to slow down. I watched in horror as the heavy pot tipped. A wave of amber liquid cascaded over the rim. It did not splash like water. It moved like lava, thick and heavy. The boiling caramel hit my bare forearm and stuck there. The heat was instantaneous and blinding. It felt like my skin was being dissolved by acid. I screamed. It was a sound I did not recognize coming from my own throat, a guttural cry of pure agony. The smell hit me next. It was sickeningly sweet, mixed with the unmistakable, acrid scent of searing flesh. I fell to my knees, clutching my wrist, trying to shake the sticky napalm off my skin, but that only made it burn deeper. My vision blurred with tears, but I could still see Bianca standing over me. She had jumped back to avoid the splash. She looked at me, then at the spilled sugar bubbling on the floor, and her expression shifted from anger to annoyance. Any normal human being would have dropped to their knees. Any sister with a shred of empathy would have scrambled for cold water or called for help. I looked up at Bianca through a haze of tears, expecting to see horror on her face. I expected her to grab a towel or at least ask if I was okay. Instead, I saw her upper lip curl in disgust. She took a step back, lifting the hem of her white dress as if I were a piece of rotting garbage that might contaminate her. "Look at this mess, Nia," she screamed, pointing at the floor where the caramel was hardening into a glassy amber sheet. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to polish this marble? You are so clumsy. You always have been." The pain in my arm was blinding. It felt like 1,000 needles were being driven into my skin all at once. I tried to speak, to tell her I needed a hospital, but my throat was closed up with shock. I managed to let out a whimpering sound, clutching my wrist to my chest. Bianca rolled her eyes. "Stop making that noise. You are being dramatic. It is just sugar." She leaned down, not to help me, but to inspect the splatter near her satin heels. When she saw a tiny speck of caramel on her shoe, she lost it completely. Her face turned a shade of red that clashed with her flawless foundation. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You could not stand that today was about me. You had to make a scene. You had to drag the attention back to yourself." I shook my head violently, tears streaming down my face. "No, Bianca," I gasped out. "I am hurt. Please." She ignored my plea. She towered over me, and for the first time I realized how small I was in her shadow. She took a deep breath and delivered the words that would burn themselves into my memory, deeper than the scar on my arm. "You are ruining everything," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "And for what? You are just a baker, Nia. That is all you are, a glorified servant with a mixer. You do not belong in this house, and you certainly do not belong at my wedding. You are just a hired help who shares my last name. So get up, clean this floor, and get out of my sight before Julian sees what a disaster you are." You are just a baker. The words hit me harder than the physical blow. In that moment, the pain in my arm became secondary to the shattering of my heart. I had paid for her tuition. I had covered for her mistakes. I had loved her since she was a baby. But to her, I was nothing more than a utility, a service provider, a peasant to be tolerated. Something inside me broke right then and there. But it was not a break that made me weak. It was the snapping of the chain that had bound me to her for my entire life. I stopped crying. I looked at her, not as my sister, but as a stranger. I gritted my teeth, forcing the scream back down my throat. I would get up. I would clean the floor. But I would never look at her the same way again. I waited for the instinct that is supposed to be hardwired into every mother. The instinct to protect, to comfort, to rush to the aid of their injured child. But as Patricia Brooks swept into the kitchen, the clicking of her designer heels echoing on the tiles, she did not even look at me. Her eyes went straight to the puddle of caramel on the floor, and then immediately to Bianca, who was standing there, unhurt, but theatrically clutching her chest. My mother gasped, rushing over to my sister, her hands fluttering over Bianca's white dress like she was defusing a bomb. "Oh, my poor darling," Patricia cooed, smoothing down Bianca's hair. "Did it splash on you? Did she ruin the silk? Let me see." I was still on my knees, clutching my arm, my skin radiating heat like a furnace, but to them, I was invisible. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to speak through the pain. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "I am burned. Badly. I need to go to the emergency room." Patricia finally turned to look at me. Her expression was not one of concern. It was the look one gives a clumsy waiter who has dropped a tray of drinks. She sighed, a long, exasperated sound that made my blood run cold. She walked over to the oversized stainless steel freezer, pulled out a bag of frozen peas, and tossed it at me. She did not hand it to me. She threw it. The bag hit my chest with a thud and slid onto my lap. "Put that on it and stop being so dramatic, Nia," she said coldly. "It is just a kitchen burn. You have had dozens of them. Do not ruin your sister's mood right before the most important moment of her life." She turned back to Bianca, fussing over a microscopic thread on her dress. "Julian is pulling into the driveway right now. He cannot see you like this. Look at you. You are a mess. Your face is red. You are sweating and you smell like burnt sugar. It is unseemly." I pressed the frozen bag against my arm, the cold biting into the burn, but the chill in her voice was far worse. Unseemly. That was all I was to her, an unsightly blemish on her perfect picture. Patricia pointed a manicured finger toward the heavy service door at the back of the kitchen. "Go out the back way. Take your car and go home. Do not come into the main hall until you have cleaned yourself up and found something appropriate to wear. And for heaven's sake, put some foundation on. You look exhausted." I stared at her, waiting for a crack in the facade, waiting for her to realize that her daughter was in agony. But she was already checking her reflection in the microwave door, practicing her welcoming smile for the billionaire fiancé. In that moment, the final thread of hope I had been holding on to snapped. I realized that to Patricia Brooks, I was not a daughter. I was a prop that had malfunctioned. I struggled to my feet, clutching the bag of peas, my arm throbbing in rhythm with my heartbeat. "I will go," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "But you might want to check the oven, Mother. Because while you were worrying about Bianca's shoes, the main course just started to burn." I did not wait for her reaction. I turned and walked toward the service exit, leaving them alone with their vanity. As I pushed the heavy door open, stepping out into the cool evening air, I made a silent vow. I would come back through the front door, and when I did, they would not be able to send me away ever again. I retreated to the butler pantry, which was little more than a glorified closet behind the main dining hall. It smelled of silver polish and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the lavender-scented air of the party outside. My hands were shaking so violently that I dropped the roll of gauze twice. The burn on my forearm was blistering, now angry red bubbles rising on my skin like warning signals. I was trying to wrap it one-handed, gritting my teeth against the throbbing heat when the door clicked open. I looked up, and for a fleeting second, hope fluttered in my chest. It was my father, Calvin. He stood in the doorway looking dapper in his tuxedo, but his eyes were wild with anxiety. I thought he had come to check on me. I thought he had come to apologize for Mom, or maybe to drive me to the urgent care himself. "Dad?" I whispered, letting my guard down. It really hurts. I think I need to go to the doctor. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. I know, baby girl, I know, he muttered, but he did not look at my arm. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. Listen, Nia, we have a situation. A big one. I frowned. A situation? Did he mean the caramel on the floor? Number. He moved closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive scotch and fear. I need a favor, he said, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. I need a loan. Just until next week. I need $5,000 transferred to my private account. Right now. I stared at him, unable to process the words. The pain in my arm seemed to pulse in time with the shock. Dad, I just got burned. Mom kicked me out. And you are asking me for money? He grabbed my uninjured shoulder, his grip tight and desperate. You do not understand, Nia. I slipped up again. I owe some guys in East Point. They just texted me. They said if I do not pay by midnight, they are coming here. To the house. Tonight. He looked over his shoulder as if the debt collectors were already in the hallway. They will make a scene, Nia. They will ruin Bianca Night. Julian has investors out there, tech moguls, senators. We cannot have thugs banging on the front door. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the ice pack. He was not worried about my injury. He was not worried that his daughter was in agony. He was worried that his gambling addiction would shatter the illusion of wealth he had built around himself. He was a coward in a rented tuxedo, willing to sacrifice my bank account to save his face. This was the pattern of our lives. He made the mess, and I paid for the cleanup. But looking at his pathetic, desperate face, something in me shifted. The daughter who always said yes died in that pantry. The silence that followed my refusal was heavier than the humid Atlanta air. No. It was a small word, but I said it with the weight of 30 years of suppression behind it. I am not giving you $5,000, Dad. Not for your gambling, not for your debts, and certainly not while I am standing here injured because of your golden child. My father's face went from desperate to ugly in a heartbeat. The charm evaporated, replaced by the sneer I saw whenever he lost a hand of poker. You are selfish, Nia, he hissed, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. Just like your grandmother. Always hoarding, always counting pennies while your family suffers. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. And now, when Bianca's future is at stake, you want to play the victim? You are willing to let thugs ruin her engagement party over a little bit of money? You really are useless. The old Nia would have crumbled. The old Nia would have pulled out her phone, transferred the funds, and apologized for being difficult. But the pain in my arm was a sharp, clarifying anchor. It reminded me that their love was conditional, and the condition was that I remained a doormat. I stepped back, my back hitting the shelves of silver platters. I am not the one who gambled away the catering budget, Dad. And I am not the one who pushed her sister into boiling sugar. Figure it out yourself. Or better yet, ask your rich future son-in-law. I turned away from him, effectively ending the conversation. He sputtered something about respect and stormed out, likely to try and manipulate my mother into solving his mess. I was left alone in the pantry, shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. I walked to the service door, the one my mother had ordered me to leave through. I put my hand on the cold metal handle. It would be so easy to just push it open, get in my car, and drive away. I could go home, treat my burn, and never speak to them again. But then I caught a glimpse of movement through the crack in the main dining room doors. It was Julian. He was standing near the champagne tower, surrounded by a group of my mother's friends who were laughing too loudly. He wasn't laughing. He was checking his watch. He looked bored. Actually, he looked worse than bored. He looked like a man who was realizing he had made a terrible investment. He rubbed his temples, ignoring Bianca, who was clinging to his arm and posing for a photographer. I realized something in that moment. Julian Vance didn't care about the perfect napkins or the imported flowers. He was a businessman. He built an empire on efficiency and quality. He was standing in a room full of people who were pretending to be something they were not, and he saw right through it. If I left now, I would just be the clumsy sister who ruined the floor. I would remain the just a baker in his narrative, too. My mother wanted me to disappear. My father wanted me to pay up. Bianca wanted me to scrub the floor. Number 1 released the handle of the service door. I was done hiding in the shadows of my own life. I was done being the fixer who got no credit. If they wanted a baker, I would give them a baker. But I wasn't going to make some simple sheet cake. I was going to give them a performance. I was going to finish the dessert, walk into that dining room, and force them to choke on their own words. I reached into my bag and pulled out the bottle of painkillers I kept for long shifts. I dry swallowed 2 pills, wrapped my arm tighter with the gauze, and turned back toward the kitchen. The exit was behind me. The only way out was through. I walked back into the main kitchen, expecting to hear the clatter of pans and the shouting of orders. Instead, I walked into a funeral. The line cooks were standing perfectly still, their eyes fixed on the floor. In the center of the room, Chef Pierre, the man my parents had paid $15,000 to hire, was untying his apron. He threw it onto the stainless steel counter with a force that made everyone jump. Bianca was standing in front of him, her face pale, not with guilt, but with terrified realization that her perfect evening was imploding. "I cannot work like this," Pierre shouted, his French accent thick with rage. "I have cooked for presidents. I have cooked for royalty. I will not be insulted by a child who thinks she knows better than a Michelin star chef." He pointed a shaking finger at Bianca. "You come into my station, you critique my reduction sauce, and you tell me it tastes like mud. I am finished." He did not wait for a response. He signaled to his 2 sous chefs and they followed him out the back door, leaving 50 half-plated appetizers and 0 desserts. The silence that followed was heavy. Bianca stood frozen, staring at the swinging door. She knew exactly what this meant. In 20 minutes, 50 of the most influential people in Atlanta, including her future husbands, investors, would be expecting a world-class meal. If they got nothing, Julian would be humiliated. And if Julian was humiliated, the wedding was off. She turned slowly, and her eyes landed on me. I braced myself for an apology, or maybe an accusation. But Bianca did not operate on normal logic. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the gears turning. She did not see her injured sister. She saw a replacement. She marched over to me, ignoring the gauze wrapped around my arm. "You," she said, her voice breathless with panic. "You have to do it. You have to finish the service." I looked at her incredulously. "You just told me to get out. You just called me a baker and said I was ruining your night, and now you want me to cook for 50 VIPs with a second-degree burn?" Bianca grabbed my uninjured arm, digging her nails in. "Pierre left because of you, Nia. The negative energy you brought into this house drove him away. So you are going to fix it. We need a dessert, a showstopper, something that will make them forget the appetizers are late. I pulled my arm away. I am not doing it, Bianca. I am in pain, and I am not your servant. Her face twisted. If you do not do this, I will tell Mom you fired Pierre. I will tell Dad you sabotaged the night because you were jealous. You know they will believe me. They always do. She was right. It did not matter that she was lying. In the court of the Brooks family, I was guilty until proven innocent. But then she said something that sealed her fate. Besides, she sneered, this is all you are good for, right? Mixing flour and sugar. So prove you are worth keeping around. Make the dessert. Do it, and I might let you sit at the kids' table during the reception. I looked at the empty station, then at the ingredients Pierre had left behind. Imported chocolate, gold leaf, fresh berries. I looked at Bianca, who was practically vibrating with entitlement. Fine, I said, my voice cold. I will make the dessert, but not for you, and not for Mom. I am doing it because, unlike you, I do not leave a job unfinished. Get out of my kitchen, Bianca, and pray I do not poison the ganache. I looked at the mess Pierre had left behind, and then at my sister, who was vibrating with impatience. Well, she snapped, are you going to start baking, or do I have to call security to drag you out? I took a slow, deliberate breath. The pain in my arm was a steady, thrumming rhythm now, a reminder of exactly who I was dealing with. I will do it, I said, my voice steady. I will save your dinner. I will make a dessert that will have your investors begging for the recipe. But I have conditions. Bianca laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You are in no position to negotiate, Nia. You are hired help. Not tonight, I countered, leaning back against the counter, crossing my arms carefully to avoid jarring my injury. Tonight, if I step in to fix your mess, I am doing it as your sister, not your servant. That means, when the dessert is served, I take off this apron. I walk into that dining room and I sit at the head table, next to Mom and Dad. Bianca stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She looked me up and down, taking in my stained uniform, my messy bun, and the gauze wrapped around my arm. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She imagined me sitting next to the tech moguls and senators looking like a disaster. She thought my presence would be a joke, a contrast that would make her look even more radiant and successful. She thought I had nothing else to wear. She thought I was bluffing. Fine, she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. You want a seat at the table? You got it. But let us be clear. If you show up looking like a slob, I will laugh along with everyone else. And do not expect me to introduce you. You are there to eat and be silent. Do we have a deal? I nodded, keeping my face impassive. Deal. Now get out. I have work to do. She spun around her heels, clicking on the tile, and sashayed out of the kitchen, already pulling out her phone to text her friends about how pathetic I was. As the door swung shut behind her, the room fell silent. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. Bianca thought she had won. She thought she had tricked me into working for free while setting me up for public humiliation. She had no idea. She did not know that in the trunk of my car, hidden beneath a blanket, was a garment bag containing a dress that cost more than her entire catering budget. She did not know that I was not just going to sit at that table. I was going to own it. I turned to the prep station, my eyes scanning the high-end chocolate and gold leaf. It was time to get to work. Not as Nia the scapegoat, but as Nia the artist. And for my masterpiece, I was going to serve them a dish best served cold. Revenge. The moment the kitchen door swung shut behind Bianca, sealing her exit, I dropped the act. The submissive shoulders straightened, the pained expression tightened into a mask of cold determination. I reached into the pocket of my stained apron and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact list, bypassing Mom and Dad, and tapping on the one name that actually meant loyalty in my life. Marcus. He answered on the first ring. Nia, I thought you were deep undercover in enemy territory tonight. Everything okay? His voice was light, but I knew he could hear the edge in my breathing. Code red, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice low but commanding. The operation has changed. I need a delivery to the service entrance. ETA. 20 minutes. Marcus paused, instantly shifting from casual friend to efficient executive assistant. Go ahead. I'm listening. I took a deep breath, my eyes scanning the pantry shelves that held only mediocre supermarket chocolate. I need the vault supplies. Bring 5 kilos of the Valrhona Guanaja 70%, the Madagascar vanilla beans, the edible 24-karat gold leaf sheets, and get the molecular gastronomy kit, the one with the sodium alginate and calcium lactate. I am not making a sheet cake, Marcus. I am making the Eclipse Noir. I could hear the sound of keys jingling on his end. The Eclipse? Nia, that is a 3-day process. You have, 2 hours? I will make it work, I snapped. But that is not all. I need the package. You know which one. There was a silence on the line. The red one. The one you bought for the Entrepreneur of the Year gala next month. Nia, are you sure? That dress is aggressive. That is the point, I said, my eyes catching my reflection in the dark window. A woman with a messy bun and a burn victim's bandage staring back at me. I told them I would sit at the table. They think I am going to show up in these rags so they can mock me. I need armor, Marcus. Bring the dress, bring the diamond drop earrings from the safe, and bring the Louboutins. Understood? He said, the engine of his car revving in the background. I am leaving the warehouse now. Nia, whatever they did to you, make them pay for it. I hung up and set the phone down on the counter. My hand was still throbbing, the burn radiating heat through the ice pack, but, strangely, the pain felt distant now. It was fuel. For years I had played the role they assigned me. The quiet one, the helpful one, the one who stayed in the back. But tonight, the back of the house was coming to the front. I walked over to the sink and splashed cold water on my face, washing away the tears and the sweat. I looked at the ingredients Pierre had left behind. They were decent, but they were not excellence. They were not me. My family wanted a baker. I was about to show them the difference between a cook and a culinary architect. I was about to prepare a dish that cost more than my father's car, and I would serve it wearing a dress that cost more than my mother's dignity. The clock was ticking, but for the first time all night, I was not afraid of the time. I controlled it. Marcus was on his way. The ammunition was coming. And when I walked out those double doors later, I would not be Nia, the sister. I would be the CEO of the Cocoa Bean, and I was about to acquire a hostile target. Marcus slipped through the service entrance like a ghost, depositing the thermal cases in the garment bag before disappearing into the night. I locked the doors. For the next hour, this kitchen was not a part of the Brooks estate. It was a laboratory. I unwrapped the blocks of Valrhona Guanaja chocolate, the scent of bitter cocoa filling the air, masking the smell of cleaning chemicals. I moved with a rhythm that was pure muscle memory. My left arm was a screaming mess of raw nerve endings, but I forced it to submit. Every time I lifted the heavy mixing bowl, pain shot up to my shoulder like an electric shock. I bit my lip until I tasted iron, but I did not slow down. Pain is temporary. Perfection is permanent. I began the tempering process. It is a precise dance of heating and cooling. 115 degrees down to 80, back up to 88. If you miss by a single degree, the chocolate blooms and becomes dull. I watched the thermometer like a hawk, my good hand whisking furiously, while my injured hand stabilized the bowl. I was creating the shell for the Eclipse Noir. It is a sphere of dark chocolate so thin it shatters at the touch of a spoon, revealing a core of smoked sea salt caramel and hazelnut praline mousse. I poured the glossy black liquid into the molds, my movements surgical. Next came the chemistry. I mixed passion fruit puree with calcium lactate and dropped it carefully into a sodium alginate bath. Spherification. Tiny golden jewels of fruit caviar formed instantly. They would provide the acid to cut through the richness of the chocolate. I was not just feeding them sugar, I was orchestrating an experience. As I plated the first sphere, dusting it with 24-karat edible gold leaf, I caught my reflection in the stainless steel prep table. I looked deranged. Sweat was dripping down my temples, stinging the edges of my bandage. My eyes were wild. But the plate in front of me was flawless. It sat on the black slate like a dark planet, mysterious and intimidating. It did not look like something made by a home baker. It looked like it belonged in a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in Paris. I arranged 50 of them on the rolling carts, each one identical, each one a masterpiece of architecture and chemistry. My arm was on fire. My legs were shaking from exhaustion. But as I placed the final gold flake on the last sphere, I felt a cold calm wash over me. I had taken their insults, their doubts, and their cruelty, and I had transmuted it into this. They wanted a dessert. I was about to serve them a revelation. I stripped off the dirty apron, letting it fall to the floor next to the dried caramel stain. The cooking was done. Now it was time for the transformation. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos, and I was the conductor. My movements were sharp and precise, despite the throbbing in my left arm. I had just placed the chocolate spheres into the blast chiller when the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was not the heat of the ovens. It was a sudden drop in temperature. I did not need to turn around to know that Patricia Brooks had entered the room. She did not scream like Bianca. Her cruelty was far more subtle. She walked past the prep station, trailing her fingers along the stainless steel counter. "You are making quite a mess, Nia," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. I ignored her, focusing on the hazelnut praline. That was when I heard the click. It was soft, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator, but to a chef, it was as loud as a gunshot. She had leaned against the convection oven and casually turned the dial to off. I stopped whisking. I looked at the dark oven display and then at her. "You just turned off the oven, Mom." She laughed, a tinkling, hollow sound. "Oh, do not be ridiculous. I just bumped it. Besides, do you really think anyone is going to eat this? They are here for the Champagne and Bianca Company, not your little science experiments. Stop trying so hard. It is desperate." She thought that would break me. She thought I would panic because the delicate sponge cakes inside would collapse without heat. But she did not know who she was dealing with. I did not say a word. I simply reached for the blowtorch Marcus had brought in the kit. I was not baking the old-fashioned way anymore. I was torching the meringue bases individually for a caramelized finish that an oven could never achieve. I fired up the torch, the blue flame roaring to life inches from where she stood. She took a step back, her eyes wide. "Step aside, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "unless you want to explain to Julian why the dessert course is on fire." She huffed, smoothed her dress, and turned to leave. "You are embarrassing yourself," she muttered. But as she walked out, I saw something new in her posture. It was not just annoyance. It was fear. She was starting to realize that the daughter she had tried to bury in the background was about to burn the whole house down. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, but it was the silence of victory. 50 plates of Eclipse Noir sat in perfect formation on the rolling carts. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the dark chocolate spheres glistened like black pearls, each one dusted with a constellation of edible gold leaf. They were not just desserts. They were a declaration of war. I wiped a smudge of cocoa powder from the edge of the last plate and stepped back. My arm was throbbing with a dull, persistent ache, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins numbed the worst of it. I had done the impossible. I had created a Michelin standard service in under 2 hours with one hand and a family trying to sabotage me. A soft knock at the service door broke my trance. I moved quickly, checking the peephole before sliding the bolt back. Marcus stood there in the shadows, holding a garment bag stamped with the logo of the most exclusive boutique in Atlanta and a small vanity case. He did not say a word. He just nodded, his eyes scanning my disheveled appearance with a mix of concern and respect. He handed me the items, and I took them, my fingers brushing against the cool plastic of the bag. "Thank you," I whispered. He gave me a thumbs up and disappeared back into the night, leaving me alone with my ammunition. I retreated to the small staff restroom off the pantry. It was cramped and smelled of bleach, but for the next 10 minutes, it was my dressing room. I stripped off the white chef coat that was stained with sweat and chocolate. I let it fall to the floor, kicking it into the corner. That coat belonged to Nia, the servant. Nia, the doormat. The woman who was about to walk out of this room was someone else entirely. I unzipped the garment bag. The dress spilled out like liquid fire. It was a floor-length gown made of heavy crimson silk with a plunging neckline and a high slit up the thigh. It was bold. It was aggressive. It was the kind of dress that did not ask for attention. It demanded it. I slipped into it, the cool fabric soothing my overheated skin. It fit like a second skin, accentuating curves that my family usually ignored or criticized. Next came the transformation of the face. I washed away the kitchen grime and applied a layer of foundation covering the flushed skin of exertion. I swept a dark, smoky shadow across my eyelids, making my eyes look fierce and dangerous. I painted my lips a deep blood red that matched the silk of my gown. I pulled the pins from my messy bun, letting my hair cascade down my shoulders in loose waves. Finally, I reached for the jewelry box. I put on the diamond drop earrings that caught the light with every turn of my head. I looked down at my injured arm. The white gauze was stark and ugly against the red silk. I could not hide it, and I realized I did not want to. It was evidence. I adjusted the bandage, making it neat, and then draped a sheer silk shawl over my shoulders. It partially obscured the injury, but did not hide it completely. It added a touch of mystery. I stepped into the 6-inch Christian Louboutin heels, the red soles flashing a warning. I looked in the cracked mirror above the sink. The woman staring back at me was unrecognizable. She stood tall, shoulders back, chin lifted. There was no fear in her eyes, only a cold, steely resolve. The baker was gone. The CEO had arrived. I opened the door and walked back into the kitchen. The sound of my heels clicking on the tile was different now. It was sharper, louder. I walked over to the rolling carts and grabbed the handle. It was time to serve dessert, and it was time to serve justice. The heavy mahogany doors to the grand ballroom were the final barrier between my two lives. On one side lay the kitchen, where I was the injured servant, the obedient daughter, the invisible fixer. On the other side was the stage, where I was about to make my debut as a woman who could not be erased. I signaled the head waiter, a young man who looked at me with wide eyes, stunned by my transformation. "Open them," I whispered. He nodded and pushed the doors wide. The room was a sea of beige, cream, and blush pink. Bianca had insisted on a theme of understated elegance, which, in practice, meant that 50 of Atlanta's wealthiest citizens looked like they were fading into the wallpaper. The air was filled with the polite murmur of conversation and the clinking of crystal. But the moment I stepped across the threshold, the atmosphere shifted instantly. It started at the tables nearest the door. The conversation simply died. Heads turned. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The silence rippled outward like a wave until the entire room was quiet enough to hear the sharp, rhythmic click of my red-soled heels on the parquet floor. I did not shrink. I did not hunch my shoulders or look at the floor as I had done for 30 years. I lifted my chin, letting the chandelier light catch the diamond drop earrings that swung against my neck. My dress was a violent splash of crimson in a room of pastels. It was a deep, blood-red silk that moved like liquid around my body, the high slit revealing a flash of leg with every step. It was inappropriate for a sister of the bride. It was aggressive. It was perfect. I walked slowly, deliberately taking the long route to the head table. I could feel their eyes on me. These were people who had ignored me for years, who had looked right through me when I handed them their coats or refilled their wine. Now, they could not look away. I saw Mrs. Sterling, the gossip columnist for the local paper, actually lower her glasses to get a better look. I saw the bank manager who had denied my father a loan whisper something to his wife, pointing at me. They were trying to figure out who I was. Was I a celebrity guest? A new investor? They did not recognize the woman in the red dress as Nia, the baker. I kept my eyes fixed on the head table. Bianca was sitting in the center, looking like a princess in her white lace cocktail dress. But as I drew closer, I saw her smile falter. Her eyes widened, scanning me from the diamonds to the dress to the shoes. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking washed out and pale. She had expected me to sneak in through the side door wearing a spare uniform, or perhaps a borrowed, ill-fitting dress. She had expected a prop. Instead, I had just walked onto her set and stolen the spotlight without saying a single word. I reached the head table and stopped. My parents were frozen, their mouths slightly agape. My mother looked like she had swallowed a lemon. I didn't wait for an invitation. I pulled out the empty chair next to my father, the one that had been grudgingly reserved for the help. I sat down, arranging the silk skirt around me like a throne. I turned to my mother, flashed a dazzling, cold smile, and spoke loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Sorry I am late, Mother. The kitchen was a disaster, but I handled it. I hope you saved me some champagne. I picked up the crystal flute from the table, the movement causing the bandage on my arm to peek out from under my shawl just enough to be seen, a hint of violence amidst the glamour. I took a sip, looking out at the room that was still staring at me. I had arrived, and the show was just beginning. Julian Vance had spent the entire evening looking at his phone. He was scrolling through emails, checking global markets, or perhaps just disassociating from the shallow conversation around him. He had barely glanced at Bianca, even when she was clinging to his arm. But when I sat down, when I claimed my space at the table and spoke with that icy, calm authority, he stopped. His thumb hovered over the screen. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head. His eyes were a piercing shade of steel gray. For the first time all night, they were actually focused. He looked at me not with the hungry, objectifying gaze of a man seeing a beautiful woman in a red dress. It was something different. It was the intense, calculating look of a predator recognizing another predator in the wild. He scanned me from the diamond drop earrings down to the silk shawl that partially covered my bandaged arm, and then back up to my eyes. He tilted his head slightly to the side, as if he were trying to solve a complex equation. He was used to women like Bianca, women who giggled and preened, women who molded themselves into whatever shape they thought he wanted. He was accustomed to being the sun around which everyone else orbited. He was not used to a woman who walked into a room like she owned the mortgage and poured her own champagne without waiting for permission. I saw a spark ignite in his eyes. It was not lust. It was curiosity. Genuine, dangerous curiosity. He was looking at me and asking himself, "Who are you, really?" Bianca saw it too. She was sitting between us, and I watched her knuckles turn white as she gripped her silver fork. She looked from Julian to me and back again, panic rising in her chest. The silence was stretching too long, and she could physically feel the attention of the room shifting away from her on her own engagement night. She let out a forced, high-pitched laugh that sounded like glass breaking under pressure. "Oh, Nia, stop playing dress-up," Bianca said, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "You look ridiculous. Did you rent that costume just to embarrass me?" "Julian, darling, do not stare at her. She is just acting out because she is jealous of us. She thinks wearing a flashy dress will make up for the fact that she is just the help." She reached out to touch Julian's arm, trying to physically pull his attention back to her. But Julian did not look away from me. He did not even flinch at her touch. He simply placed his phone face down on the table, a gesture that spoke volumes. It meant he was fully present. He ignored Bianca completely, as if she were a buzzing fly. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the white tablecloth bridging the distance between us. "I do not think she looks ridiculous," Julian said, his voice deep and smooth, carrying effortlessly over the quiet room. "I think she looks like the only person here who is not pretending." Bianca gasped as if he had slapped her across the face. My mother choked on her drink, coughing into her napkin. I simply held his gaze, my expression unreadable. I did not smile. I did not blush. I just took another sip of champagne and raised a single eyebrow, challenging him. The air between us crackled with electricity. In that moment, the dynamic of the entire room shifted. I was no longer the sister in the shadows. I was the puzzle he was determined to solve. And Bianca was terrified because she knew she did not have the pieces. Just as the tension at the head table threatened to snap, the double doors swung open once more. This time it was a procession. The waitstaff moved in perfect synchronization, each carrying a slate platter that held the black chocolate sphere. They placed them down in front of the guests, with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. For a moment, nobody moved. The dessert sat there, dark and mysterious, the gold leaf catching the candlelight like distant stars. It looked less like food and more like a sculpture carved from the night sky itself. Then, the first guest tapped the shell with their spoon. The sound was a sharp, delicate crack that echoed in the sudden silence. The sphere shattered, revealing the golden passion fruit caviar and the hazelnut praline mousse hidden inside. A collective gasp rippled through the room. It was audible. It was the sound of 50 wealthy people realizing they were about to experience something extraordinary. The bank manager, who had sneered at me earlier, took a bite and his eyes widened. He actually moaned a low sound of pure culinary ecstasy that made his wife giggle. The room erupted into chatter, but this time it was not polite small talk. It was genuine excitement. People were pointing at the plates, taking photos, and scraping the slate to get every last drop of the smoked sea salt caramel. I sat back, sipping my champagne, watching the reaction with a calm detachment. I knew it was good. I did not need their validation. But watching them lose their composure over a dessert made by the woman they had ignored was satisfying. Bianca saw it too. She looked around the room, her eyes darting from table to table, taking in the overwhelming praise. She saw the Tech Horizon investors nodding in approval. She saw Mrs. Sterling, the gossip columnist, scribbling furiously in her notebook. And most importantly, she saw Julian. He was staring at the shattered sphere on his plate with a look of intense concentration, as if he had just discovered a new element. Panic turned into opportunity in Bianca's eyes. She realized that the disaster she had feared turned out to be a triumph, and she could not let me have it. She cleared her throat loud enough to draw attention back to herself. She placed a hand on Julian's arm, leaning in close so the nearby investors could hear. "I am so relieved it turned out okay," she said, her voice pitching up into a fake modest tone. "I was so worried the concept might be too bold for a traditional engagement, but I told Nia that we had to take a risk. I spent weeks designing this flavor profile. I sketched out the design for the sphere myself. I am just glad my sister was able to follow my instructions without ruining it." I froze. The audacity was breathtaking. She was claiming the Eclipse Noir, a recipe I had spent 2 years perfecting in my laboratory, a recipe that required knowledge of molecular gastronomy that she could not even spell, let alone execute. My mother nodded, vigorously backing up the lie. "Yes, indeed. Bianca has such a wonderful eye for detail. She really pushed for the passion fruit. Nia is a sturdy worker, of course, but she lacks the vision. Bianca is the true artist here." I gripped the stem of my champagne glass so hard I thought it might shatter. They were doing it again, erasing me, taking my labor and painting their names on it. But this time was different. This time I was not standing in the kitchen. I was sitting right there. And this time the person they were lying to was a man who knew exactly what the Eclipse Noir was because he had been trying to buy the rights to it for 8 months. I looked at Julian waiting. He chewed, slowly swallowed, and then turned his steel gray eyes directly onto Bianca. The trap was set, and she had just walked right into it. Julian did not offer the polite nod of approval that society demanded. Instead, he studied the shattered remains of the sphere on his plate with the intensity of a diamond appraiser. He scooped up a perfect cross-section containing the dark chocolate shell, the hazelnut praline, and the glistening golden passion fruit caviar. He placed it in his mouth and for a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I watched his throat move as he swallowed. I saw his eyes close briefly, not in ecstasy, but in deep calculation. When he opened them again, the boredom that had clouded his expression all evening was gone. It was replaced by a sharp, laser-like focus. He looked at the plate, then he looked at me. It was a micro-expression, invisible to everyone else, but I caught it. It was the look of a man who had just found the missing variable in a complex equation. He knew. He recognized the flavor profile because he had likely spent thousands of dollars trying to replicate it in his own test kitchens. He put the spoon down with a soft clink that sounded like a gavel striking a podium. He turned to Bianca, who was beaming like a pageant queen, expecting a compliment on her genius. "Interesting," Julian said, his voice devoid of warmth. "This texture is remarkable. Tell me, Bianca, how exactly did you achieve this specific suspension of the passion fruit? Is this a reverse spherification using calcium lactate, or did you use an agar setting method?" The smile on Bianca's face froze. It became brittle like old plaster. She blinked rapidly, her mind scrambling for a word that sounded intelligent. "Oh, well, you know, Julian," she stammered, her hand fluttering nervously to her pearl necklace. "It is a very complex process. I just told the kitchen to make sure it was fruity and firm. We used the best ingredients, of course, just like I planned." Julian stared at her for a long, uncomfortable second. The silence stretched out thin and painful. He did not mock her. He did not laugh. He simply let her answer hang in the air, exposing its own stupidity. Then, without breaking eye contact with her, he shifted his attention. He did not turn his head, but his focus leaped across the table like a spark jumping a gap. "And you," he said, addressing me directly, his voice dropping an octave. "What is your opinion? Is it just fruity and firm, or is there something else?" I swirled my champagne, looking at the bubbles rising to the surface. I felt the weight of the room on me. I felt my mother's glare burning into the side of my face, warning me to shut up and cover for my sister. But I was done covering. I looked Julian in the eye. "It is reverse spherification," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Using a 0.5% sodium alginate bath, and the smokiness you taste in the caramel is not hickory or mesquite. It is applewood salt smoked for 12 hours. It cuts the sweetness of the Valrhona chocolate by exactly 15%. Julian leaned back in his chair. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen him smile all night. "Applewood," he repeated softly, as if testing the word. "That explains the finish. I have been looking for that specific finish for 8 months." He ignored Bianca completely now. He looked at me with a mixture of respect and something else. Recognition. "You are not just a baker, are you, Nia? You are the cocoa bean." The air in the room grew thin, charged with a sudden, sharp intellectual tension that felt heavier than the humidity outside. Julian did not look away from me. He simply steepled his fingers, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he were inspecting a rare diamond for flaws. "I see," he said, his voice quiet but commanding enough to silence the murmurs at the nearby tables. "Applewood smoke. That is sophisticated." He turned back to Bianca, who was now smiling nervously, her eyes darting between us like a trapped animal. "Bianca," he continued, his tone dangerously polite. "Tell me about the molecular structure of the mousse. I noticed a distinct lack of gelatinous texture. yet it holds its shape perfectly at room temperature. Did you use agar-agar, or perhaps a carrageenan blend? Bianca froze. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at our mother for help, but Patricia was busy staring at her plate, suddenly finding the pattern of the china fascinating. Bianca laughed, a high, brittle sound that grated on everyone's nerves. "Oh, Julian, you know I don't bore myself with the chemistry," she said, trying to sound dismissive. "I just tell the staff what I want, and they make it happen. It's magic." "It is not magic," I said, my voice cutting through her excuse like a scalpel. "It is science." I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, the diamonds at my wrist catching the candlelight. "It is not agar or carrageenan," I explained, keeping my eyes locked on Julian. "Both would compromise the mouthfeel, making it too rubbery for a praline base. I used a lecithin emulsion derived from soy, stabilized with a precise ratio of cocoa butter at 31 degrees Celsius. It allows the mousse to remain aerated but firm, melting only upon contact with the palate." Julian stared at me. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, he picked up his spoon and took another bite, closing his eyes to test my statement. When he opened them, the boredom was completely gone, replaced by a look of intense, predatory focus. "Lecithin," he murmured. "Of course. That explains the silkiness." Bianca slammed her fork down. "Oh, stop it!" she snapped, her facade cracking. "Who cares about the ingredients? It's just sugar. Nia is just trying to sound smart because she read a Wikipedia article. She probably messed it up anyway." Julian turned to her, his expression cold. "She did not mess it up, Bianca. She just described a technique that most pastry chefs take a decade to master." He looked back at me, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. "And she did it while you were busy worrying about the color of the napkins. Tell me, Nia. The cocoa bean. That's the ghost kitchen that just outbid the Ritz for the mesmerizing truffles contract, isn't it?" I took a slow sip of my champagne. "We did not just outbid them," I corrected him softly. "We outperformed them in a blind taste test. Unanimously." Julian nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair. He looked at me with a new kind of respect, the kind one shark gives another in the open ocean. "I have been trying to get a meeting with the owner of that company for 6 months," he said. "My assistant told me they were reclusive, unreachable." "I am not reclusive," I said, glancing at my parents who were now staring at me in horror. "I am just careful about the company I keep." The air in the room shifted from intellectual curiosity to suffocating tension in the span of a heartbeat. Julian was still looking at me with that spark of genuine admiration, and that was more than Bianca could endure. To her, attention was a finite resource. If I had it, she did not. She stood up so abruptly that her chair tipped backward, crashing onto the parquet floor with a sound like a gunshot. The noise shattered the polite atmosphere instantly. I watched her face contort. The mask of the perfect blushing bride dissolved, revealing the ugly, insecure bully underneath. Her hands were trembling, not with nerves, but with a blind, consuming rage. She reached for her wine glass, a heavy crystal goblet filled with a dark, vintage Merlot. I saw the intent in her eyes a fraction of a second before she moved, but I did not dodge. I sat perfectly still. She hurled the contents of the glass at me. The dark red liquid hit my chest with shocking coldness. It soaked into the sheer silk shawl I was wearing to hide my bandages and splashed up onto my neck and jawline. Droplets flew onto the pristine white tablecloth, looking like a crime scene splatter. The wine dripped down my front, merging with the crimson of my gown, making the fabric heavy and wet against my skin. For a second, the only sound in the room was the drip, drip, drip of wine hitting the floor. Then Bianca screamed. It was not a cry of distress. It was a screech of pure entitlement. "You dirty little tramp!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You think you are so smart with your science talk and your stolen recipes. You are just doing this to humiliate me." She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face flushed a blotchy, unattractive red. "I see what you are doing, Nia. You are trying to seduce him. You are trying to steal my husband right in front of my face because you have never been able to get a man of your own. You are pathetic." The accusation hung in the air, gross and unfounded. The guests exchanged horrified glances. The Tech Horizon investors looked at Julian, then at the hysterical woman screaming at the table, clearly reevaluating their decision to associate with this family. My mother, Patricia, finally snapped out of her shock. She stood up, reaching for Bianca's arm. "Bianca, sit down," she hissed. "You are making a scene. Get off me!" Bianca shoved our mother away, her eyes wild. "No! I want her out! She is ruining my life! Look at her! Sitting there like she owns the place! She is just a jealous, ugly, burnt-up baker!" She grabbed a bread knife from the table, not to use it, but waving it around in her agitation. I slowly wiped a drop of wine from my cheek with my thumb. I looked at the red stain on my skin, then up at my sister. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply looked at her with pity. "You missed a spot, Bianca," I said softly. "But do not worry. This dress is silk. It cleans easier than your reputation will after tonight." My calmness only fueled her fire. She lunged toward me, her hand raised to strike, but she never made contact, because in that moment, the statue came to life. Julian moved. The silence that followed Bianca's outburst was absolute. It was not the quiet of a library or a church, but the vacuum of a space where all social oxygen had been sucked out. 50 of Atlanta's elite sat frozen in their chairs, forks hovering halfway to their mouths, eyes wide with the delicious horror of witnessing a wealthy family's self-destruct. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic dripping of the red wine falling from the hem of my silk dress onto the parquet floor. It sounded like a ticking clock counting down to an explosion. I did not move to wipe the wine away. I sat perfectly still, my chin raised, my eyes locked on my sister, who was heaving breaths that sounded like sobs. But before Bianca could scream again, movement flashed in my peripheral vision. It was my mother. Patricia Brooks had finally reached her breaking point. But, true to form, her rage was not directed at the daughter who had just thrown a glass of Merlot at a guest. It was directed at the target she had been hitting for 30 years. Me. She moved with a speed that defied her age and her tight evening gown. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated humiliation. In her mind, I was the problem. My dress was the problem. My presence was the problem. If I had just stayed in the kitchen, if I had just worn the apron, if I had just been invisible, none of this would be happening. She reached the head table in 3 long strides, her hand already raised high in the air. "You ungrateful little wretch," she hissed, the venom in her voice loud enough for the first 3 tables to hear. She swung her arm down, aiming a slap directly at my face. It was a motion I knew well. It was the punctuation mark she used whenever I stepped out of line. I braced myself for the sting, refusing to flinch, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cower. But the blow never landed. Just inches from my cheek, her wrist was caught. It stopped with a dull thud of flesh against flesh. The sudden halt was so jarring that my mother gasped, losing her balance slightly. She looked down, her eyes wide with shock, to see a hand wrapped firmly around her forearm. It was a large, manicured hand, extending from a charcoal gray suit sleeve. Julian Vance had risen from his chair. He had moved so fast that it was almost a blur, yet he stood there now with the stillness of a statue. He was not gripping her hard enough to bruise, but he was holding her with an immovable force. He did not look at my mother immediately. He looked at me, checking my face for fear, checking to make sure I was unharmed. Then, slowly, terrifyingly, he turned his head to look at Patricia. The room let out a collective breath. The sight of the billionaire groom physically intercepting his future mother-in-law was a scandal that would be whispered about for decades. Julian's expression was unreadable, which made it all the more frightening. He was not red-faced like Bianca. He was ice-cold. "I think," Julian said, his voice low and devoid of any emotion, "that there has been enough violence for one evening." "Patricia." He said her name not as a greeting, but as a warning. He slowly lowered her arm, pushing it away from me as if he were discarding something distasteful. My mother stumbled back, clutching her wrist, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at Julian, then at Bianca, and finally at me, realizing for the first time that the power dynamic in this room had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer the matriarch commanding her children. She was a guest who had just worn out her welcome. And Julian Vance was no longer the passive observer. He was the judge, and he had just delivered his verdict.
Julian released my mother's arm with a dismissive shove that sent her stumbling back into her chair. He did not spare her another glance. His attention returned entirely to me.
He reached for a clean white linen napkin from the table, dipped the corner into a glass of sparkling water, and stepped closer. The room watched in stunned silence as the billionaire CEO of Vance Global bent down and began to gently dab at the red wine stain on the bodice of my silk dress. He treated the fabric with more respect than he had treated my entire family all night. I stood perfectly still, letting him work, feeling the heat of his proximity. Bianca let out a strangled sound, a mix of a sob and a scream, but Julian cut her off without even looking up.
"Do not speak, Bianca,"
he said, his voice calm but lethal.
"You just accused your sister trying to steal me. That is fascinating."
Because from where I am standing, she is the only person in this room who has not asked me for a single thing. He straightened up, tossing the stained napkin onto the table directly in front of my father. It landed with a soft thud that felt like a gavel strike. He turned to face the room, addressing the 50 guests who were hanging on his every word. "You all know I am a businessman. I value authenticity. I value value." He gestured to me with an open hand. "You see a baker, you see a servant. You see someone to be mocked. But I see the owner of the cocoa bean. The ghost kitchen empire that just revolutionized the luxury dessert market in the Southeast." Gasps rippled through the room again. My father dropped his fork. My mother's face went gray. Julian continued, his eyes locking onto Bianca's horrified face. "I have been trying to partner with her company for months. I have sent emails, I have made calls. I was told she was busy. Now I see why. She was too busy cleaning up your messes and being treated like garbage by people who are not fit to polish her shoes. He looked back at me, and for the first time, his expression softened into something genuine. A smile played on his lips, a shared secret between equals. She is not trying to steal your husband, Bianca. She does not need to. She is the only woman here who has enough class to walk away from a family like this, and enough talent to build an empire while doing it. I felt a surge of triumph so potent it was almost intoxicating. I looked at Bianca, whose face was crumbling, her makeup running with tears of humiliation. I looked at my parents, who were shrinking in their seats. And then I looked at Julian. I raised my chin and smiled. It was not a sweet smile. It was the smile of a queen who had just watched the executioner sharpen his blade. Julian reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal suit jacket. For a second, my father leaned forward instinctively, thinking he was reaching for a checkbook to pay for the wedding expenses. But Julian pulled out a sleek, matte black business card, embossed with silver lettering. He did not hand it to my father. He did not hand it to Bianca. He held it out to me. I do not usually conduct business at engagement parties, Julian said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the ballroom. But since this engagement seems to be dissolving rapidly, I see no reason to wait. I have had my legal team draft a letter of intent for the cocoa bean. We have analyzed your growth trajectory and your supply chain logistics. You are operating at a level that rivals my European competitors, but you lack the distribution network to go global. He took a step closer, closing the distance between us until we were the only two people in the world. Vance Global wants to change that. I am prepared to offer you a strategic partnership, full autonomy over the creative process, access to our international shipping lanes, and an initial investment for 20% equity. He paused, letting the anticipation build. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. My father, Calvin, was practically vibrating in his seat, his eyes darting from Julian to me. He was doing the math. He was thinking about his gambling debts. He was thinking about the sharks in East Point. $15 million, Julian said. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. $15 million. I heard my mother gasp, a sound like a tire losing air. My father actually slumped back in his chair, his mouth falling open in a comical display of shock. Bianca looked as if she had been punched in the gut. $15 million was more than the net worth of the entire Brooks estate. It was more money than they had ever seen in one place. And it was being offered to the daughter they had treated like a servant, the daughter they had banished to the kitchen. Julian did not look at them. He kept his steel gray eyes locked on mine, waiting for a reaction. "I am serious, Nia," he said. "This is not charity. This is business. You have a product that I want, and unlike your family, I am willing to pay what it is worth." I looked at the card in his hand, and then I looked at my parents. The transformation in their faces was instant and sickening. The disgust and embarrassment were gone, replaced by a hungry, desperate greed. My mother sat up straighter, smoothing her dress, trying to catch my eye. My father licked his lips, already calculating how much of that $15 million he could guilt me into giving him. They looked at me, not as a daughter, but as a winning lottery ticket. I slowly reached out and took the card from Julian. The paper was cool and heavy in my hand. I looked at the silver text and then back at him. $15 million for 20%, I repeated, my voice steady. "That is a generous valuation, Mr. Vance. But the cocoa bean is not just a company. It is my escape. It is the one thing in this life that is mine and mine alone. I tapped the card against my chin, watching my parents hold their breath, praying I would say yes. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. We have a lot to discuss. The transformation was instantaneous and sickening. It was as if the number 15 million was a magic spell that erased the last 30 years of history. The shock on my parents' faces melted away, replaced by a hunger so raw and transparent it made my stomach turn. Greed is a powerful drug, and in the span of 3 seconds, my mother and father went from being my abusers to my biggest fans. Patricia was the first to pivot. The hand that had been raised to slap me moments ago now reached out to smooth a stray lock of hair from my forehead. Her face, previously twisted in a snarl of contempt, rearranged itself into a mask of beaming, tearful pride. It was a performance that would have been impressive if it were not so grotesque. "Oh, my brilliant girl," she cooed, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Did you hear that, Calvin? $15 million! I knew it. I always told everyone that Nia was the quiet genius of the family. I always said she had a special gift, did I not?" She turned to Julian, blinking rapidly, as if holding back tears of joy. "We have always encouraged her independence, Mr. Vance. We knew she needed space to create. We are just so proud." My father was not far behind. He puffed out his chest, standing tall next to the daughter he had just tried to extort for $5,000. "That is the Brooks bloodline right there," he declared, hooking his thumbs into his tuxedo belt. "I taught her everything she knows about business. Tough love. That was our strategy. We pushed her hard because we knew she had the potential to be a titan. We made her work for it. And look at the result." Then came the casualty of their greed. To secure their seat at the table of my success, they had to make room. They turned on Bianca, who was standing there, shivering, her white dress stained with wine, her face a ruin of running mascara. She looked at them, expecting comfort, expecting them to defend her against the woman who had just upstaged her engagement. Instead, she found herself staring down the barrel of their ambition. "Bianca, for heaven's sake, stop sniffling!" my mother snapped, her voice sharp and cold. "You are making a spectacle of yourself. Look at your sister. Look how poised she is. Look at what she has achieved while you are busy worrying about flower arrangements. You are an embarrassment." My father nodded in agreement, looking at Bianca with open disdain. "Your mother is right. You have done nothing but spend my money and cause drama all night. You nearly ruined a $15 million deal with your childish temper tantrum. You are useless, Bianca. Absolutely useless. Why cannot you be more like Nia?" I watched Bianca's face crumble. The betrayal hit her harder than any physical blow. She was realizing what I had known since I was 7 years old. Their love was not unconditional. It was a transaction, and she had just bounced a check. I looked at my parents flanking me like eager bodyguards, touching my arm, patting my back, smiling at me with dollar signs in their eyes. They thought they had won. They thought the money was theirs. I let a small, cruel smile touch my lips. They had no idea that the Bank of Nia was permanently closed. My mother moved in for the kill. Her arms were wide open, her face arranged in that perfect, camera-ready smile she saved for charity galas. She lunged toward me, intent on wrapping me in a maternal embrace that would seal our new alliance. She wanted to physically claim me, to stamp the Brooks seal of approval on my success so she could take credit for it later in the society pages. Come here, my darling, she cooed, ignoring the tension in the room. Let Mommy give you a hug. We have so much to celebrate. I did not just step back. I recoiled. I moved with a sharpness that made her freeze in her tracks. I raised my uninjured hand, palm out, a universal stop sign that created a physical barrier between her perfume and my space. Do not touch me, I said. My voice was not loud, but it had the cutting edge of a diamond blade. The room fell silent again. The smile on my mother's face faltered, twitching at the corners. Nia, honey, she stammered, lowering her arms slowly. Don't be like that. I am just so happy for you. We are family. Family, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I looked at her, then at my father, and finally at the bandage on my left arm. I slowly unwound the top layer of the silk shawl, exposing the white gauze that was now stained with a bit of wine and sweat. The caramel on the kitchen floor hasn't even hardened yet, Mother, I said, locking eyes with her. The burn on my skin is still throbbing. My nerves are still screaming from the scalding sugar that you told me to put a bag of frozen peas on. You told me to leave through the back door. You told me I was unseemly. You told me I was a mess. And now, because a man in a suit put a price tag on my talent, you want to hug me? I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You do not get to hug the CEO, Mother. Not when you were the one who burned the baker. You do not get to celebrate the harvest when you salted the earth. I saw my father open his mouth to protest, to spin some new lie about tough love, but I cut him off. And you, Dad, you called me useless. You called me selfish because I wouldn't fund your gambling addiction. You told me to my face that I was nothing compared to Bianca. So do not stand there and talk about the Brooks bloodline. The only reason I succeeded is because I learned to survive in spite of you, not because of you. I turned back to my mother. Her face was pale, the reality of her loss finally sinking in. She realized that the performance was over, and she had been booed off the stage. Save your acting for the country club, Patricia, I said, dropping the formal mother for the first time. The show is closed. You wanted me to be invisible? Fine. To you, from this moment on, I am a ghost. You will never see me, you will never hear from me, and you will certainly never spend a dime of my money. I turned my back on them. It was the most liberating movement of my life. I faced Julian, who was watching me with a look of intense satisfaction. He held out his arm, not to grab me, but to offer support. I took it. I did not look back at the wreckage of my family. I walked forward, out of the ballroom, out of the shadows, and into the rest of my life. Julian stopped. He did not follow me immediately. He had one final loose end to cut. He turned back to the head table where Bianca was standing, trembling in her wine-stained dress. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading hope, thinking he might still save her. She was wrong. Julian looked at her with the same detached, clinical interest he would show a failed prototype before tossing it in the trash. I cannot marry you, Bianca, he said. The words were simple, spoken without anger, which made them infinitely more devastating. The room let out a collective gasp. Bianca let out a choked sob, reaching for his hand, but he stepped back, keeping his distance. Why? She wailed. Because of her? Because of a stupid dessert? No. Julian replied coldly. Because I curate my life with excellence. I surround myself with people who are intelligent, kind, and authentic. You are none of those things. You are cruel, Bianca. You are a bully who builds herself up by tearing others down. And worse than that, you are willfully ignorant. You tried to claim credit for a masterpiece you could not even understand. I cannot build a legacy with a partner who is both malicious and incompetent. The engagement is terminated, effective immediately. He did not wait for her response. He turned his gaze to my father, who was still frozen in his chair, the color draining from his face as the reality of the situation set in. Calvin Brooks looked like a man watching his life support system being unplugged. And Calvin, Julian continued, his voice dropping to a lower, more professional register. Regarding the merger between Vance Global and your manufacturing firm, consider it void. My team will be sending over the termination papers in the morning. Vance Global does not invest in failing infrastructures, and it certainly does not do business with men who try to sell their own daughters to cover gambling debts. My father made a strangled noise, clutching his chest. But, Julian, the investors, the loans, I will be ruined. That, Julian said, adjusting his cuffs, sounds like a personal problem. I suggest you ask your wife for advice. She seems to be an expert at managing disasters. He turned on his heel, leaving them amidst the ruins of their own making. Bianca was wailing on the floor. My mother was screaming at my father. My father was hyperventilating. It was a symphony of chaos. Julian walked toward me, his stride long and confident. He did not look back at the burning building behind him. He offered me his arm once more, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. "Ready to go, partner?" he asked. I took his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him against my side. I looked back one last time at the ballroom, at the people who had made me feel small for my entire life. They looked tiny now, distant, irrelevant. I looked up at Julian and nodded. "Drive," I said, "and don't stop until we hit the highway." The sound that tore through the ballroom was primal. It was the shriek of a spoiled child who has not only had her toy taken away, but has watched it be given to the one person she hates most in the world. Bianca did not just cry. She imploded. Her knees gave out and she collapsed onto the parquet floor in a heap of white lace and misery, pounding her fists against the wood until her knuckles turned red. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice cracking and raw. "You planned this! You jealous little witch! You came here to destroy me!" She looked up, her face a grotesque mask of running mascara and snot. The beautiful bride was gone. In her place was a feral creature consumed by her own venom. "You could not stand to see me happy. You could not stand that I was the favorite. So you stole him. You stole my life." I stopped walking, but I did not turn around fully. I simply looked over my shoulder, my expression bored. "I did not steal anything, Bianca," I said calmly. "I just picked up what you threw away. You had a diamond, and you treated it like glass. Do not blame me for your own incompetence." That broke her. The last thread of her sanity snapped. She scrambled to her feet, slipping on the wine puddle she had created earlier, kicking off her satin heels. She did not look like a woman who belonged in high society anymore. She looked like a brawler in a dive bar. She lunged toward me, her fingers curled into claws, her eyes focused on my face. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to mar the face that Julian had looked at with admiration. I heard my mother scream, "Bianca, stop!" But it was too late. She was sprinting across the dance floor, teeth bared. I braced myself, ready to defend against the blow, but I never had to lift a finger. Two shadows materialized from the perimeter of the room, Julian's security detail. They moved with the silent efficiency of predators. Before Bianca could get within 5 feet of me, a large hand clamped onto her shoulder. Another grabbed her wrist mid-swing. She was stopped dead in her tracks, her momentum jerking her back violently. She thrashed against them, kicking her bare feet, screaming profanities that would make a sailor blush. "Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am? I am Bianca Brooks. I am the bride." The lead bodyguard, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, did not even blink. "You are trespassing, ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Vance has requested that you be removed from the premises immediately." "No! Let me go! I'm going to kill her!" Bianca spat at me, the saliva landing harmlessly on the floor between us. The guards hoisted her up by her arms, dragging her backward toward the exit. Her feet dragged uselessly on the floor, leaving scuff marks. She looked small now, pathetic, a tantruming child being carried out of a supermarket. I watched her go, watched her being hauled away from her own engagement party, kicking and screaming, while the guests stared in horrified silence. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. For years I had been afraid of her anger, afraid of her power over my parents. But seeing her now, powerless and hysterical, I realized she was never a monster. She was just a bully. And bullies always crumble when you stop being afraid. I caught Julian's eye. He was watching the scene with a look of mild distaste, as if he had stepped in something unpleasant on the sidewalk. He looked at me, raising an eyebrow as if to ask, "Are you okay?" I let out a short breath and lifted my shoulders in a casual shrug. It was a gesture of total indifference. She was not my sister anymore. She was not my problem. I turned back to the exit, the sound of her screaming fading into the distance as the heavy doors swallowed her whole. As the heavy doors clicked shut, sealing Bianca's fate, my parents turned on me like wounded animals cornered in a trap. Their greed had failed. The $15 million was walking out the door with me, and the billionaire son-in-law was gone. Panic quickly curdled back into rage. My father, purple-faced and shaking, pointed a trembling finger at the exit, his voice booming off the marble walls. "You ungrateful snake!" he roared, spittle flying from his lips. "You destroyed this family. You ruined your sister's life. Get out! Do you hear me? Get out of my house right now and do not ever come back. I will call the police. I will have you arrested for trespassing. Get out of my house." I stopped. I did not flinch. I turned slowly, letting a small, amused smile play on my lips. I looked up at the crystal chandelier, then down at the imported Italian marble floors. I looked at the grand staircase where I had been forced to scrub the steps on my hands and knees just last week. "Your house?" I asked softly, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Dad, are you sure about that?" I reached into the small velvet clutch that Marcus had delivered along with my dress. My fingers closed around a single crisp piece of paper that I had been carrying for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. I pulled it out and unfolded it with a sharp snap. I held it up so they could see the official bank seal stamped in red ink at the bottom. "You see, I have been doing some research. I said, walking closer to them. It turns out that gambling addiction is expensive. You have not paid the mortgage on this estate in 2 years. The bank started foreclosure proceedings 6 months ago. They were about to auction it off next week. My father's face went from purple to a ghostly white. He sputtered, trying to find words, but I cut him off. But I know how much you care about appearances, Dad. I knew how embarrassing it would be for the neighbors to see an eviction notice on the gate. So I stepped in. I called the bank. I used the profits from the cocoa bean. The money you said was from a useless hobby, and I bought the debt. I took a step closer, dropping the paper onto the table in front of him. It fluttered down, landing next to the empty champagne glasses. I bought the note 3 months ago under a shell company. I own the mortgage. I own the lien. And as of this morning, I own the deed. I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the ice in the bucket. This is not your house, Calvin. It is mine. And unlike you, I am a very strict landlord. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. If you are not gone by the 1st of the month, I will have the sheriff throw your things onto the lawn. My mother let out a whimper, clutching my father's arm for support. You cannot do this, Nia. We are your parents. Where will we go? I straightened up, smoothing the silk of my red dress. I looked at them with total indifference. I do not know. Maybe you can go to East Point. I hear the rent is cheap there. Or maybe you can ask Bianca for help. Oh, wait. She is broke too. I turned back to Julian, who was watching me with a look of pure awe. He held out his hand and I took it. I walked toward the front door, the click of my heels sounding like a victory march. I did not look back at the people who had tormented me for years. They were not my masters anymore. They were just tenants, and their lease had just expired. I glanced at the diamond watch on my wrist. It was a Patek Philippe, a gift to myself after landing the Ritz-Carlton contract. It told me 2 things. 1, it was getting late. 2, my hourly rate was far too high to be wasting any more time on people who could not afford me. I looked back at my parents. They were huddled together by the buffet table, looking like deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. I am a fair businesswoman, I said, my voice cutting through their panic. So I will give you a choice. A counteroffer, if you will. My father's head snapped up. Hope, pathetic and desperate, flickered in his eyes. He thought I was going to offer them a grace period. He thought I was going to say they could stay for free because we were family. He still did not understand that the daughter he knew was dead. Option 1, I continued, holding up a single finger. You vacate the property within 30 days. You take only your personal effects. The furniture, the art, and the fixtures stay. They are collateral against the damages you have caused to the estate. You leave the keys on the counter and you walk away. Clean break. My mother let out a strangled sob, clutching her pearl necklace as if it were a lifeline. Mia, you cannot be serious. This is our home. We have lived here for 20 years. You cannot just kick us out on the street. I ignored her and raised a second finger. Option 2. You can stay. They both leaned forward, the relief washing over them visible. I saw my father's shoulders drop. I saw my mother begin to smile, ready to launch into a speech about forgiveness. If, I added, my voice dropping to a steely register, you can write me a cashier's check right now for the full amount of the arrears. That is, the principal, the accrued interest at a default rate of 18%, the legal fees I paid to acquire the debt, and the penalties for late payment. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. I did the math for you. It comes to exactly $842,000.50. I held out my hand, palm open, as if expecting them to place the money in it. Do you have it, Dad? Do you have nearly $1 million in that tuxedo pocket? Or did you lose that at the poker table, too? The silence was the answer. My father looked down at his shoes, defeated. He looked older, suddenly, the bluster and arrogance deflated, leaving behind a small, sad old man who had gambled away his legacy. My mother looked at him, waiting for him to fix it, but for the first time, she realized there was no fix. The checkmate was absolute. I didn't think so, I said, dropping my hand. The 30-day notice stands. I suggest you start packing tonight. I have a team of contractors coming in on the 1st of the month to renovate. I am thinking of turning your master bedroom into a home office. The lighting in there is excellent. I turned away from them, signaling to Julian that I was finally done. I walked to the door, feeling the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders with every step. I left them standing in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of a party for a wedding that would never happen, in a house they no longer owned, staring at a bill they could never pay. Julian paused with his hand on the brass handle of the front door. He looked at me and then glanced back at the dining room table, which was now a landscape of wreckage. Spilled wine pooled on the tablecloths. Half-eaten desserts sat melting on the slate plates. My parents stood like statues in the ruins of their social standing. "Wait," Julian said. "There's one more thing. We should seal this properly. Before we leave the past behind entirely, let us secure the future." He walked back to the head table, not to the guests, but to the center seat where Bianca had sat only minutes ago. He swept a crystal vase of wilting lilies onto the floor with a crash. He did not even blink at the sound of the shattering glass. He cleared a space on the white tablecloth, pushing aside the debris of the evening to make a clean, flat surface. From his inside jacket pocket, he produced a folded document. It was the letter of intent, the preliminary agreement for the $15 million investment. He laid it down on the table, smoothing the paper with his hand. He took a heavy silver fountain pen from his pocket, uncapped it, and held it out to me. The ink was black. The nib was gold. I walked back to the table. The sound of my heels was the only noise in the room. I felt the eyes of my parents on me. They were watching the transaction that would change my life and realizing that not a single cent of it would ever touch their hands. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the seat of power. I sat down, arranging my red silk dress around me. I looked at the document. The terms were clear. 20% equity for $15 million. Full creative control. A partnership of equals. I looked at the red wine stain on the tablecloth next to the paper, the stain from the glass Bianca had thrown at me. It looked like a wound that was finally closing. I looked up at Julian. He was standing over me, not as a savior, but as a witness. He nodded once, a silent confirmation that this was real, that I was real. I took the pen. The metal was cool against my skin. I did not hesitate. I did not shake. I pressed the nib to the paper and wrote my name. Nia Brooks. The signature was bold and sharp, taking up space on the page. It was not the signature of a daughter asking for permission. It was the autograph of a founder authorizing a merger. I capped the pen with a decisive click that echoed through the silent room. I handed it back to Julian. He took it and slipped it into his pocket, then picked up the document, blowing on the ink gently before folding it away. "Done," he said, his voice ringing with finality. I stood up. I did not look at my parents again. They were part of the furniture now, part of the house I would soon renovate. I turned to Julian and took his arm. We walked out of the dining room, across the foyer, and through the front doors. The night air was cool and smelled of rain and freedom. I left the heavy wooden doors open behind me, leaving the house exposed to the elements, leaving the past to rot. I stepped into the waiting car, and as the engine roared to life, I finally allowed myself to smile. The baker had left the building. The CEO had just begun. The distance between the dining room and the front door was only 40 feet, but it felt like crossing a border between two warring nations. My heels clicked against the marble foyer for the last time. Behind me, I heard the desperate scrambling of footsteps. It was the sound of rats realizing the ship was sinking. My parents were running. For 30 years they had walked past me, looked through me, and walked over me. Now, finally, they were chasing me. "Nia, wait!" My father's voice cracked, echoing off the high ceilings. "Baby girl, please, let us talk about this. We can work something out. We are family." The word family used to be a command. It used to be a weapon they used to silence me, to make me serve, to make me stay. Now it was just a noise. It meant nothing. I did not slow down. I did not falter. Every instinct conditioned into me since childhood told me to stop and fix their problems, but I crushed that instinct under the heel of my red-soled shoes. I stared straight ahead at the open night, where the driveway lights illuminated Julian's sleek black sedan like a getaway chariot. "Nia, listen to reason," my mother shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "You cannot leave us like this. What will the neighbors think? What will people say?" I almost laughed. Even at the end, even when facing homelessness and financial ruin, her biggest fear was not losing her daughter, it was losing her reputation. That realization was the final cut that severed the cord. I walked out into the humid Georgia night. The air hit my face warm and heavy, but it tasted sweet. It tasted like my own life. Julian was a step ahead of me. He reached the car before the driver could move. He pulled the heavy rear door open, standing back to let me pass. He did not urge me to hurry. He simply waited, his presence a solid wall between me and the chaos on the porch. My father reached the bottom step, panting heavily, his face slick with sweat. He reached out a hand as if to grab my arm to physically drag me back into my role as the servant. "Nia." Julian stepped in front of the open door. He did not touch my father. He did not have to. He simply occupied the space, radiating a cold, dangerous authority that made my father freeze mid-step. "That is close enough, Calvin," Julian said, his voice low and devoid of pity. "She is done listening, and you are done talking." I slid into the back seat. The interior was a sanctuary of cool leather and silence. I watched through the open door as my father slumped his shoulders, defeated by a man he could never hope to equal. Julian got in beside me and the door thudded shut, sealing us in. The sound was final. It was the sound of a vault locking. "Drive," Julian said to the driver. The car glided forward, moving smoothly down the long, winding driveway. I looked out the tinted window. I saw my parents standing under the harsh yellow porch light, two small, insignificant figures shrinking into the distance. They looked like strangers. They looked like ghosts haunting a house that no longer belonged to them. I watched until the house disappeared behind the line of trees, until the darkness swallowed them whole. I turned my head, facing forward, facing the road ahead. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel a pang of regret. I just felt the engine humming beneath me, carrying me away from the nightmare and toward the dawn. The interior of Julian's car was not just a vehicle. It was a mobile command center. It was a long wheelbase sedan, likely a Maybach, with soundproofing so efficient that the screaming chaos of my family's estate was instantly severed the moment the door thumped shut. The air conditioning was set to a crisp 68 degrees, a stark contrast to the humid Georgia night I had just escaped. I sank back into the hand-stitched leather seats, my body finally registering the adrenaline crash. My arm throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache under the silk bandage. But for the first time in my life, the physical pain was background noise compared to the clarity of my mind. I expected Julian to turn to me. I expected the standard comforting cliches that men usually offer in these situations. I expected him to ask if I was okay, to offer me a tissue, or, perhaps, to try and take my hand and tell me I was brave. I braced myself for the pity, or worse, the opportunistic flirtation of a hero who feels he is owed something for the rescue. But Julian did none of those things. He pressed a button on the center console, and a small compartment opened, revealing a crystal decanter of water and 2 glasses. He poured one and set it on the tray table in front of me without a word. Then, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen a few times, his brow furrowed in concentration, and turned it toward me. On the screen was not a prenup, or a hotel reservation, or a tabloid article. It was a supply chain logistics map, specifically the distribution network for the cocoa bean. "I noticed a bottleneck in your sourcing of the Tahitian vanilla," Julian said, his voice even and professional, as if we were in a boardroom and not speeding down the highway at 80 miles per hour. "You are currently importing through a third-party distributor in Miami. It is eating into your margins by roughly 6%. If we leverage Vance Global's direct shipping lanes from the South Pacific, we can cut that cost in half and reduce the transit time by 4 days. That freshness will significantly impact the flavor profile of your mousse." I blinked, staring at him. I was covered in wine, nursing a burn, and had just evicted my parents. And this man was talking to me about vanilla import taxes. I looked at the map, my brain shifting gears from survival mode to CEO mode. I looked at the red line he had highlighted. "You are right," I said, my voice gathering strength. "But the issue is not just the cost, it is the temperature control. The third-party distributor guarantees a continuous cold chain. If I switch to your shipping lanes, can you guarantee the pods will not sweat in transit? If humidity rises above 60%, the beans ferment too early." Julian looked at me. A slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. It was not the smile of a man looking at a pretty woman. It was the smile of a master chess player realizing his opponent just made a brilliant countermove. "We have a proprietary nitrogen cooling system in our cargo holds," he replied. "We use it for transporting medical-grade pharmaceuticals. Your vanilla will be safer with us than it would be in your own refrigerator." He tapped the screen again, scrolling to a financial projection. "And that brings me to the second point, scaling. You are currently producing 500 units a week. To fulfill the Ritz contract and the pending orders from the European luxury hotels, you need to hit 5,000. The ghost kitchen model won't hold that volume. I have a facility in Midtown, 10,000 square feet, industrial blast chillers, climate-controlled chocolate rooms. It is sitting empty. It is yours." I picked up the water glass, taking a long sip. The water was cool and clean. I looked at him over the rim of the glass. He was not treating me like a damsel in distress. He was treating me like an asset, a partner. He saw the business I had built, the mind I had cultivated, and he respected it enough to skip the small talk and get straight to the work. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me. Why? I asked, lowering the glass. You could have just hired a pastry chef. You could have bought any company. Why did you go to such lengths? Why buy the mortgage? Why humiliate my family? Why $15 million? Julian closed the cover of his tablet and set it down. He turned his body slightly to face me, his steel gray eyes locking onto mine. Because I am bored, Nia, he said simply. I am surrounded by people who say yes. I am surrounded by people who want my money, but have no idea how to earn it. I am surrounded by mediocrity. When I tasted that dessert, I tasted obsession. I tasted perfectionism. And when I saw you in that kitchen, working through the pain, handling a crisis while your family tried to sabotage you, I saw someone who is just as hungry as I am. He leaned back, resting his arm on the door. I don't want a charity case, and I don't want a trophy wife. I want a peer. I want someone who can stand at the head of the table and not blink. Tonight, you didn't just survive. You conquered. That is worth far more than $15 million to me. I looked at him, really looked at him, stripped of the billionaire mystique. I saw a man who was lonely at the top, looking for someone who could breathe the thin air with him. I set the glass down. The facility in Midtown, I said, keeping my voice steady. Does it have a dedicated room for sugar work? I need low humidity for the blown sugar garnishes. Julian's grin widened. It has too. Then we have a deal, I said. He did not reach out to touch me. He simply nodded, a gesture of absolute respect. We sat in the comfortable silence of two titans who had just aligned their empires, watching the city lights of Atlanta blur past the window, moving toward a future that we would build together, brick by gold brick. The car turned a corner, heading toward the skyline, and for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward something. The view from the 40th floor is very different from the view through a basement window. The sun hits the glass of these floor-to-ceiling windows at exactly 6 a.m, flooding the room with a clean, golden light that does not smell of stale grease or fear. I usually stand here with my coffee, looking out over the Atlanta skyline, tracing the path of the highway that I took that night. It looks like a ribbon of light from up here, a lifeline that led me out of the dark and into the sky. It has been exactly 365 days since I walked out of that ballroom in my wine-stained dress. A lot can happen in a year when you stop apologizing for your own existence and start capitalizing on it. The cocoa bean is no longer a secret kept in the shadows. We are no longer just a ghost kitchen operating out of a rented space. We are a global phenomenon. Partnering with Julian was the accelerant, but the fire was all mine. We launched the Paris flagship store 3 months ago. The critics said it was arrogant for an American chocolatier to open a boutique in the Marais. They said the French would never accept it, but on opening day, the line wrapped around 3 city blocks. When the food critic for Le Monde tasted the Eclipse Noir, he cried. He wrote that it tasted like the beautiful, tragic poetry of a storm. We sold out of 6 months of inventory in 48 hours. We have expanded into Tokyo, utilizing the high-speed logistics network that Julian mapped out on that car ride. The nitrogen-cooled shipping containers ensure that my pralines arrive in Ginza with the exact same texture they had when they left the tempering room in Atlanta. We have locations opening in Dubai and London next quarter. The company that my parents called a useless hobby is now valued at over $200 million. And the best part is that I did not have to compromise a single ounce of quality to get there. I still approve every flavor profile. I still spot check the batches. The only difference is that now, when I walk into the kitchen, nobody tells me to clean up. They stop what they are doing and wait for my instructions. And then there is this place. You might be wondering about the room I am sitting in right now. You might think it is a rented studio or a set designed to look like success. It is not. This is my living room. This is the penthouse of the Sovereign Building. It sits at the very top of the city, looking down on the streets where I used to feel invisible. I bought it 6 months ago. I did not ask Julian to buy it for me. I did not use a trust fund. I wrote the check myself. Every piece of furniture in this room, from the Italian leather sofa to the abstract art on the walls, was paid for with money I earned from my own creations. There is a specific kind of peace that comes from knowing that the roof over your head belongs to you. There is no landlord to threaten eviction. There is no father to gamble away the deed. There is no mother to tell you which room you are allowed to enter. I own the key. I own the space. I own the silence. Julian and I are still partners, in every sense of the word. He respects my autonomy as much as he respects my profit margins. We challenge each other. We argue about logistics and marketing strategies, but we never argue about my worth. He never tries to dim my light to make himself shine brighter. He understands that we are two suns in the same solar system, and that is why we burn so bright. I sometimes think about the girl who was afraid to speak up at the dinner table. I think about the woman who let her sister take credit for her work because she thought she didn't deserve the applause. I wish I could go back and tell her that the pain was temporary, but the power she was building was permanent. I wish I could show her this view. But I suppose, in a way, I am showing her right now. Every time I sign a contract, every time I launch a new collection, every time I sit on this balcony and drink wine that I chose for myself, I am honoring her. I am proving that the help was actually the hero all along. The apron is gone, the scars have faded, and business has never been better. The estate on Paces Ferry Road did not go down with a fight. It went down with a whimper. True to my word, I sent the contractors in on the 1st of the month. My parents were still there, sitting amidst a fortress of cardboard boxes they had been too proud to pack until the final hour. They expected a reprieve. They expected me to storm in, scream, cry, and then write them a check. They expected the drama that fuels dysfunctional families. Instead, they got a sheriff's deputy and a locksmith. The eviction was quiet, clinical, and absolute. The locks were changed before their sedan even hit the main road. The auction for the furniture, the mahogany dining table, the antique armoires, the very chair my father sat in to belittle me, was held online. I didn't even watch it. I simply saw the deposit hit the account, a final liquidation of their hollow legacy. I hear things, of course. Atlanta is a small city when you strip away the layers of pretension. I know that Calvin and Patricia ended up in East Point, just as I predicted. They live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex where the walls are thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments, and the hallway always smells faintly of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. There is no housekeeper to pick up their wet towels. There is no gardener to manicure the lawn. There is just the relentless, grinding reality of their own choices. My mother, A woman who once hosted galas for 500 people now spends her days trying to convince the other tenants that she is merely between estates, clutching her pearls as if they are religious artifacts. My father has shrunk. Without the big house and the country club membership to prop up his ego, he is just an angry old man yelling at the television, still waiting for a lucky hand that will never be dealt. And then there is Bianca, the golden child, the princess who needed everything to be perfect. Fate, it seems, has a particularly sharp sense of irony. She did not marry a backup millionaire. She did not find another savior. Her reputation in our social circle was incinerated the night Julian walked out. She became radioactive. No respectable man wanted the drama, and no respectable company wanted the liability. Last week, an associate sent me a photo. It was taken at a mid-tier sports bar near the airport. In the background, wearing a tight, uncomfortable uniform and a sash that said Promo Girl, was my sister. She was holding a tray of cheap, neon-colored shots, forcing a smile for a group of men who were not looking at her eyes. She spends her nights pouring drinks for people she used to look down on, tolerating their bad jokes, enduring their wandering hands, desperate for tips to pay her rent. She is finally learning what it feels like to serve. She is finally understanding the physical toll of standing on your feet for 8 hours in heels that hurt, smiling when you want to scream. I wonder if, in those moments of exhaustion, she remembers how she used to snap her fingers at me to refill her wine. I wonder if she tastes the bitterness of her own medicine. I do not visit them. I do not send Christmas cards. I blocked their numbers on my phone the day I signed the deed over to the new owners. Occasionally, a mutual acquaintance will try to bring them up. They will lower their voice and say, "Nia, it's so sad. They are really struggling. Maybe you could just help a little?" I shut it down immediately. I do not feel hate. Hate requires passion. Hate implies that they still have power over my emotions. I do not feel that anymore. But I also do not feel pity. Pity is reserved for victims of circumstance, for people who were dealt a bad hand and tried their best. My family was dealt a royal flush, and they set the cards on fire because they liked the flame. Their struggle is not a tragedy. It is a consequence. It is the physics of the universe correcting an imbalance. I provided them with the ultimate gift, the opportunity to stand on their own 2 feet. For the first time in their lives, they are earning their keep. They are living the life they can afford, not the life they stole from me. I have released them. The cord is cut. The debt is paid. And as I sit here in the silence of my own success, I realize that the greatest revenge was not destroying them. It was simply letting them be themselves, without me there to save them. I reach for the silver frame sitting on the marble desk. The photo is not of 2 people embracing at sunset or toasting at a lavish party. It is the moment we stood in front of the new distribution center in Tokyo, holding giant gold-plated scissors, ready to cut the ribbon. Our eyes are not on the camera lens, but looking straight ahead in the same direction. That is the truest portrait of this relationship. It is not a sappy romantic fairy tale, but a strategic commitment between 2 conquerors. People still ask me, with that mix of curiosity and envy, "When are you getting married? When do you officially become Mrs. Vance?" They still think in that old, worn-out groove, the mindset that killed my mother and drowned Bianca. They think the ultimate destination for a woman, no matter how successful, is finding a husband to lean on. They do not understand that I did not climb out of the deep pit of dependency just to walk into another golden cage, no matter how spacious it is. Julian and I are not married. We haven't even discussed it. Not because we fear commitment, but because we do not need a piece of paper to define this bond. Our relationship is not built on possession or the need for provision. Bianca wanted Julian because he was an unlimited credit card, a ticket to high society without the labor. And me? I have my own black card. I have a net worth large enough to buy an entire island if I wanted to. When we go out to dinner, sometimes I pay the bill. The first time I did, the waiter looked at Julian with apprehension, but he just smiled and sipped his wine. He is not threatened by my independence. He is aroused by it. He loves how I argue about global cocoa market fluctuations. He respects how I turned down a bad investment deal he proposed. We are not he and she, one leader and one follower. We are two parallel lines moving forward at breakneck speed. Julian never brings me roses or chocolates. He knows I own a chocolate factory and I hate useless sentimental clutter. Instead, for my birthday, he gifted me the intellectual property rights to a new food freezing technology that helped me double my production scale. And the gift I gave him in return was a quarterly financial report with profits exceeding expectations by 200%. That is our love language: efficiency, growth, and power. I place the photo back in its spot, my finger tracing lightly over the glass. I do not need him to feed me. I do not need him to shelter me. I need a teammate strong enough to run with me in this brutal marathon of commerce. Someone who never tells me to take a rest when I want to conquer the next peak. We are not a blindly dating couple. We are two empires merging. And when two great fires meet, they do not extinguish each other. They create a blaze bright enough to burn down the old world outside. People love to put labels on you. They love to put you in a box because it makes them feel safe. For 30 years, I was just Nia the baker. To my family, that title was an insult. It was a synonym for servant. It meant I was the one who stayed in the kitchen while they drank champagne. It meant I was the one with flour in my hair and burns on my arms, while they wore silk and diamonds. They thought that calling me a baker was a way to keep me small. They thought it defined my limit. But they made a fatal mistake. They forgot that the person who prepares the food controls the hunger. They forgot that the kitchen is not a prison. It is a laboratory where raw ingredients are transformed into power. So I want to ask you a question. What do they call you? Do they call you a dreamer? Do they call you a failure? Do they call you difficult or stubborn or too ambitious? Do they look down on you because you work with your hands or because you are starting from zero? Good. Let them talk. Let them underestimate you. Being underestimated is the greatest competitive advantage you will ever have. It allows you to move in the shadows. It allows you to build your foundation while they are too busy admiring their own reflection. Take every insult they throw at you and treat it like fuel. Take their doubt and throw it into the mixing bowl. Add a cup of their cruelty. Whip it until it turns into cold, hard ambition. Bake them a cake called success. Make it towering and undeniable. Make it so beautiful that they cannot look away. But here is the most important part. Do not offer them a slice for free. Do not give them a discount because you share a bloodline or a history. Make them stand in line. Make them make a reservation 6 months in advance. Make them pay the market rate for the excellence you created. And when they complain about the price, Look them in the eye and tell them that the price went up yesterday. Because the sweetest taste in the world is not Valrhona chocolate or Tahitian vanilla. It is the realization that the people who once treated you like garbage can no longer afford to be in your presence. My name is Nia Brooks, and I am no longer just a baker. I am the architect of my own life. I built an empire out of sugar and spite, and I am just getting started. If you are tired of being the side character in your own story, if you are ready to stop apologizing and start conquering, then you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications. Let us build something dangerous together. Class is dismissed. Now get back to work. The most powerful lesson from Nia's journey is that excellence is the ultimate leverage. While her family focused on shallow appearances, she focused on mastery. She proved that true revenge is not about fighting back. It is about outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small. Do not waste your energy begging for a seat at their table. Instead, build your own. Use their doubt as fuel. Perfect your craft in the dark, and let your results speak so loudly that they can no longer afford your time. Your skills are your exit ticket to freedom. Ready to write your own success story? Subscribe now and let's build your empire together.